Welcome to Behind the Smile with Ash Butterss, a podcast designed to reveal the truth behind the masks we wear. Together, we look to demystify the human mind and its behaviours in relation to mental health, trauma and addiction. My name's Ash and I'll be your host as we uncover the real stories of people's pain and the steps they've taken to live a life of freedom in recovery. From sobriety to spirituality, join me each week as we uncover the reasons why people seek recovery and how their lives have changed by living one day at a time. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Behind the Smile. Today's guest is Courtney Anderson. Courtney is a sober coach, podcast host, and author. She is the founder of National Sober Day and the founder of Sober Vibes, an online community for the sober and sober curious. She believes in empowered sobriety and breaking stigmas of addiction and recovery. And that's what we're all about here on Behind the Smile. She is a wife, a mother, and a lover of Bravo TV. Mm-hmm. Now, Courtney made the decision to quit drinking on the 18th of August 2012, which means she hasn't had a drink for over a decade now. I am really excited for this chat today. We've been trying to make this happen for quite some time, so I know it's going to be a special conversation. And with that, I'd love to welcome Courtney onto Behind the Smile. Courtney, hello, welcome. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you? And thank you for that wonderful introduction. And I am very happy to be here to talk to you too.
Oh, thank you so much. Now tell me, where are you dialing in from today?
The suburbs of Detroit, Michigan.
Fabulous. So the other side of the world, it's, I think just gone past, right on 5:30 p.m. for you. So
yeah.
I'm waking up drinking coffee and you're winding down probably with a herbal tea.
Yes, but I have to say I love your energy for 7:30 in the morning and over in Australia. So I dig it.
Thank you, Courtney. It's actually something that I've worked out and gained a lot of clarity in my sobriety is that I am a morning person and I wear one of these Aura rings now and I'm obsessed with tracking my sleep and my chronotype, and I'm definitely that person that is most effective in the morning. So what I really need to watch is like what time I go to sleep so that I can ensure that I'm getting up nice and early, being as productive as I can, because if you ask me to do anything after 3 p.m., it's a different story.
No, I was the same way. And then I had a child. So then I kind of had to readjust my whole day, and just now my pocket of time is his nap time. But once he goes down at 7:30, I'm done. I have no more brain capacity.
I bet. And how old's your son, Courtney?
He's about to turn 2.
Oh, how beautiful. That's a very sweet age. I became an auntie recently. My niece she's coming on 6 months and she's just delicious. So
yes,
love a baby.
Keep enjoying all of those moments because it gets more and more fun as they get older and older. So,
oh, how exciting. Brilliant. Now, Courtney, I would love for our listeners here today just to get to know a little bit more about you before we dive into the meat and bones of this interview. So can we kick it off with, where did you grow up? What does an average day look like? And what do you do for fun?
So I kind of grew up all over. My dad got transferred around a lot. So I was actually born in Texas, and then we moved to Michigan, and then we moved to Canada for a little bit, and then we moved back to Michigan. And I grew up, again, for the longest place I've lived, grew up in the suburbs of Detroit. So that was always, that was a fun experience looking back on being able to move around like that, but also too, I was really shy when I was a kid because you kept having to reintroduce yourself,
and form new relationships and new bonds, and that can be really challenging when you're a child.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely, especially when you move around a lot. By the time you're 7, 8 years old. So,
and I wonder if subconsciously there was something going on in your mind that was like, I don't want to get too close to people because I'm going to be moving again soon anyway, because it was so out of your control.
Yeah, I mean, definitely. I'm sure that there was like a detachment at some point that I probably did form, or maybe it helps me say goodbye. It's like easier for me to say goodbye nowadays. I don't want to sound so stone cold, but it's a conditioning, right? So it is how it is.
And it is that fine line, isn't it? I was just recently working with a client on the idea of non-attachment and how important it is to be able to appreciate that everything is finite and everything is impermanent, really, on the bigger picture of things. But it is that fine line where we want to be able to form strong, close relationships, but also have that ease and comfort to life. Now, tell me, what does an average day look like for you, Courtney?
An average day for me now is ruled by my 2-year-old, who I call my little dictator. I kid, but I mean, it's the reality of the situation. And when you have kids, they rule you. You do not rule them. So him and I are usually up by 7. I get up before him to make sure that I get in my own meditation, personal development, gratitude journal, and now I'm starting to work back out again. And then I get him up, and it really just depends on the day. If it's nice out, what we will do, and we usually take a long walk together and play or do errands, and then we come home and it's lunchtime, and then I have from 12 to 3 to work on my Sober Vibes business, or take a nap if I need to. And once he gets up, then, I can either work a little bit more because his dad's home at that time, my husband, and it just depends on the day. But it's structured around him. So from 7 to 7:30, it's all about the little dictator. And then like I said in the beginning of this, after 7:30, you will find me. I have to close down everything because my brain capacity, it's done. So like by 8 o'clock, I'm in bed watching a show because like you, sleep is so important to me. And I try to go to bed between 9 and 10 o'clock.
Yeah, fantastic. And I love what you said about getting up that little bit earlier before your son wakes up so that you can invest back into yourself. So important.
Yeah, because especially too, since he's been born, there was a couple months that I was taken out of my daily routine, obviously being a new mom, being in that newborn mix. And then about 4 months in, I started to get wonky. My eyes started to get a little bit twitchy and wonky, where the thoughts of drinking sounded good. And I was like, okay, there's a problem. I need to start incorporating where I respect my sobriety and the tools I use every day to continue keeping this truck moving forward. So now, just because of I have done it. I used to do it where I would get up with him and I was like, I don't like how this is starting my day. I want a little bit of time before the little beast gets up and it's on.
Yeah. And also I imagine that when you're taking that time to create stillness in the mind, to just ground yourself, to maybe set an intention of what you are hoping to get out of the day and how you want to show up in the world, you're the best version of yourself when your son then wakes up, rather than being stressed or tired or trying to catch up almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's when I had to start noticing that, as he got older and his development started to grow, because, before he was, when he couldn't even move, it was like, cool, because he can just lay here, no problem. But it's definitely been a learning lesson for me. And I think anybody, it's like you have to be adaptable to your day, right? Because sometimes for some people, the morning time doesn't happen anymore for them. So then you have to switch it to night. You know what I mean? When I was starting to get wonky in those first couple months, I just switched it to night. And I was like, all right, I'll do all of this before I go to sleep. And then I started then to adjust it back in the morning time. But yeah, it's definitely when I go wake him up now, I'm the best mom I can be. I'm
That's
not
awesome.
I don't have that anxiety. So I think a lot of some of that stuff you can control and how you start your day.
That's such a great tip. Swapping out your morning routine to the evening, if that's what life requires at that point in time. And also just to note that you have over a decade of sobriety and you're still doing the things. I think it's such an important message. We're going to talk about early sobriety a little bit further down our conversation today. But at 10 years, you're still doing the drill, which I think is just so powerful to hear, that it is daily action, no matter how far down the line you are. And that doesn't mean it has to be something that is a struggle or, I've got to do my meditation. It's not that at all. Like, we look forward to doing these things because it gives you that calming sensation, that sense of relief. And like you said, just enables you to be the best you. That's awesome. Thank you for sharing, Courtney.
You're welcome.
Now, let's talk about fun. What do you do for fun these days?
Well, for fun, I'm going to take myself out of the equation of being a mom because, there is a lot of fun of being a mom and being able to reparent yourself through the eyes of your kid and, getting down and playing with them and just like his how he views the world and explores. But so outside of the fun that I have with him, for fun for me now is honestly sometimes moments of silence. Going to the movie by myself, if I can get in a pedicure, like any type of little moment that I can have within like an hour to 2 hours. Going out to dinner with my girlfriends has become so much more enjoyable post-kid because I don't take that for granted anymore. And plus too, me and my girlfriends have made a pact to go once a month because everybody's schedule is busy, right? So it's like nail down one day and it's really that night that I really look forward to. So, and I have to say, still every day waking up without a hangover is fun for me.
Hell yes. I completely agree with you. All right, Courtney. So I've asked you to bring in a photo. Now, this is a photo from a time in your life where you were hiding behind a smile. So you were presenting one version of yourself to the outside world, but that wasn't a true reflection of what was actually going on for you internally. Could you please describe for our listeners, what are we looking at in this photo? What's happening? And what was going on for you at that specific time in your life?
Yeah, so that picture of me, as I joked to you before, it looks like I'm going to eat a small child. I was in a functioning blackout. I was at Lake Michigan with friends, and of course, we had been at a winery all day, and then went to Lake Michigan afterwards, and sat on the beach and continued to drink and party. And that was a time where it was disposable cameras, and that was off a disposable camera. So when I got it printed up, I was like, oh my. So, and of course it was in my active addiction, and really behind the smile and what was going on in closed doors is how lonely I was, even though I had all of these people around me and I had friends and I had a social life, and that I would go home. I would go home and cry and I was not happy inside. So I think too, that picture is when I was about like 24, 25 years old, around that time, maybe even 26. So.
And did you have any sort of inclination, any sort of intuition that things weren't okay? Or were you just thinking, this is what I do at that age?
I definitely knew at 25 I needed to quit drinking. So at 25, there was a night that, I just woke up after an evening out, and I'm like, I can't keep going like this. Like, there will be one day I quit drinking alcohol. I don't know how, I don't know when, I do not know what it will look like, but I can't keep going like this. And then eventually quitting, but from 25 to 29, I did try to moderate it and fit it into my life. So
what were some of the fears? Can you remember, like, what were the thoughts that went through your mind whenever you thought about potentially having to remove alcohol from your life?
Oh my God, it was so scary, and I think I think we can all empathize with each other or with somebody if somebody's listening who's like, I'm terrified to quit drinking. Like, I don't know how it's going to look, and none of us do. So I just remember being very terrified, being very worried about my social life and my friends, and then like, how am I going to vacation? how am I going to have sex? How am I going to do life? How am I going to fly? Like, it was like, how am I going to do like everything during the day and night with drinking, right? So it was terrifying. And almost can cripple people if you get stuck and let that fear hold on to you. But, now I'll be 11 on August 18th. It's like, something beautiful happens when you quit drinking alcohol. And that is, you are no longer stuck in that life that you created for yourself with the fear around you.
That's such a beautiful way to describe it, isn't it? It's a kind of freedom that I didn't even know existed.
1000%. Even too, just like with the places you go, you don't realize how stuck you become in your day-to-day habits when you have an issue with alcohol. I mean, that will stop you from going to a new restaurant because it's too far from your house.
Yeah. And it's like, how, we can't drive because I'm going to be drinking, or there were so many things. I describe it as my world was really, really small when I was drinking. And it was such a contradiction because I thought that when I gave up alcohol, it meant that my life would get smaller. And the complete opposite has happened. My life has expanded and bloomed beyond anything I thought was possible. And even experiences that I'd had before, like I'll give you an example. I'd been to Bali many, many, many times. It's quite close to Australia, so Aussies love to go over to Bali. I'd probably been at least a dozen times. And then I went at Christmas time, and I was just shy of my 3rd sober anniversary. And it was honestly like I was experiencing that beautiful paradise for the first time. Like my eyes were all of a sudden open. And I was going back to restaurants I'd been before, noticing things that I'd never picked up on, being able to taste and appreciate the foods, the culture, everything. It was just like, it's almost like seeing the world in color. Yeah. Like you're living in black and white, and then all of a sudden it becomes color, and it's like, whoa, everything is just so beautiful.
Yeah. And even too, when you get sober, you are a newborn baby in a adult body. So that's why too, being able to see it all differently, even after 3 years, it's like, because you have this new set of eyes where it's like, man, that still to this day, if we go to a new restaurant or like drive to Detroit on a Saturday, I'm like, I get emotional about it. Like, not sitting there in hysterics, but I get emotional just for the fact that I'm doing something new, or I'm not limiting myself to be like, no, I'm hungover and can't go and do anything. I'm living. And that's the difference of what happens to you in sober life. You actually start living life in such a new way.
Beautiful. All right, Courtney, I'd love to take it back for a moment now to get a bit of a picture and an understanding of how this progressed in your life. Can we go back to your childhood for a moment? You mentioned that you grew up moving around quite a lot, but were there any significant moments that you can think of that really influenced your development and the person that you became in adulthood?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, I have to say of what influenced me in my childhood and moments were just, there were moments of, emotional trauma, and also too of the effects that within that emotional trauma that, I had to grow up really, really quick. To be a kid and take on adult responsibilities or understand adult topics. I mean, I've known what bipolar and alcoholism was since I was 7 years old. It's very young to understand that. So I had to grow up very quickly. And so, I always get like, you're an old soul. It's like, well, because I've had trauma. Which is true, you're right.
Yep.
Like it's just like when people are like they're an old soul, it's like, yeah, because they experienced trauma somewhere in their childhood where it forced them to grow up. So I really have to say it was like I can't just pinpoint it to one because it was all of what happened, where it's brought me to the point that it did. And it even brought me to the point to start drinking alcohol at 19 years old.
Let's talk about then. I fully identify, actually, I grew up in an alcoholic home and it was never just one moment. It was just almost like this period of a decade where I just felt uneasy and very much had to step above the years that I was physically and act up in a way and be more responsible. And
yeah, because then it's, when there's that type of dynamic in your family, then it's like you become the parent and it's a role reversal.
Exactly. Yes. And I remember often if my parents were drinking, I would have this undercurrent of fear. And a lot of the time it was a fear for their safety, which as a child, it's just something that you should never have to experience, really. The parent is meant to look after the child, not the other way around.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So you started drinking at 19. Now, I'd love to understand more about that. What prevented you from drinking before 19?
Because I didn't want to become an alcoholic.
Yeah.
I don't want to become one of those. So, and I sure did. And, like I smoked pot in high school, I dabbled with mushrooms. Like that was fun to me, but I drank a couple of times, but I was just like, no. And then at 19, what happened is living in the suburbs of Detroit, Canada, Windsor is right across. It's like 20-minute drive, right? At 19, that's their drinking age over there. So we would go to the bars, and at 19 for my birthday, we went there, and it was like love at first sip. And I think it was more of the fact of like getting ready to go out with girlfriends, flirting with men, dancing. Like I just loved it. Loved it, loved it, loved it. And it was on for that from 19 till I was 29.
Wow. So it took a hold then pretty quickly, I'm imagining. If your active drinking was a decade, it must have been pretty progressive.
Yeah, I mean, yes, like I said, it was love at first sip. By 25, I don't think that first year, I think from 19 to like, 20, 21 even, I don't think that it was terrible, right? It progressed. And I think that it does for so many, where it starts off very innocently. And then, a couple years down the road, you're like, oh, okay. But definitely by 25, it was dark. It was very dark.
So it sounds like it stopped being fun. And then I imagine the consequences started to kick in. What were some of the consequences that you experienced as a result of your relationship with alcohol?
Yeah, so consequences the whole time, I have to say, being in and out of relationships, but consequences, waking up in jail, waking up in hospitals, not knowing how I got there, waking up in men's beds, being like, okay, cool, I don't know your name, but I know what bar we met at, like, drinking and driving, lost opportunities of jobs and opportunities I would have had if I didn't mess it up because I was hungover or missed work the next day, So those are just to name a few. A car repossession, chronic low self-worth, if we want to get into the emotional side of it. And I have to say at 25, that's when my hangovers started to become like full-blown panic attacks. I never had anxiety. Like it's hard for me to say if I ever had anxiety as a kid. I just always remember being shy, right? And with the conditioning of the homes we talked about, anxiety was probably always there, but you don't know as a child what that feels like. So at 25, I was like, oh, this is new. Like, what is this feeling, And it all was induced because of the chronic cycle I kept living in, And then there were drugs involved for a couple of years there. I really liked cocaine. I smoked crack a couple times. Like all that went into play too.
I would love to dive a little bit deeper into the emotional impact and the impact on your mental health. I've heard you talk before about how alcohol put you on this roller coaster of shame and guilt and anxiety. Can you describe for us, what did that feel like and what was going on for you from a mental health standpoint, along with
Yeah.
the anxiety?
Well, the mental health wasn't there because I couldn't have been in good mental health with the way that I was living. And just like, let's say this, like, there were periods of time I drank every day, and then there weren't. And then I would go more of a binge, okay? Because and so I could never, there wasn't ever like I had a couple weeks during these times where I could be like, oh, my mental health was good. Because even in that state with your mental health, I always wanted to be drinking. So that's where I say, like, my mental health was not good ever in that active addiction state. Like, yes, could I get up and focus and put on a smile and sometimes be happy? Yes. But when you're constantly fixated on one thing to produce your happiness, your loneliness, all of it, like to cope, I don't think anyone's mental health state is good when they're that emotionally dependent on one substance. So it was definitely a cycle of wake up, hangover, that hangover would last a couple days, and then the anxiety would deuce after the day of drinking, and then you would crash after a couple days and kind of return to normal. And then it was like, I want to drink until I got my next drink.
Was there ever a consciousness around that self-medicating with alcohol?
Oh my God, yes. I used to sit there and watch Intervention. Be like, please, somebody give me an intervention. I swear.
Wow.
Like, yes. But I have to say, that goes back to understanding what alcoholism was at 7. And I think also, too, anybody who has a problem with drugs, alcohol, porn addiction, whatever your phone addiction, there is an awareness inside of you where your soul speaks. But you either do something about it or you don't. So yes. So I had a huge awareness around it.
Wow. That's fascinating. I think I was so in denial that I just wasn't willing to look at it. But yeah, it's fascinating to hear that you were so aware, and yet that's the hold that it has over us. We keep doing the same things and repeating the same behaviors despite the consequences. It's like, I'm going to drink today and I know what's going to happen. I know this isn't going to end well, but I'm still going to do it anyway, perhaps convincing ourselves that this time it'll be different, which is crazy.
Yeah, I do have to say, and I'm very happy that I never had that like strong denial, because a lot of people can get lost in that denial and not come back from it. And then that's what's scary too about the denial. I mean, not one way or the other is bad, but it's like same thing how I always say, I'm so happy I never had a gambling addiction. Like, I'm so grateful I did not have that denial.
Yeah.
Because that's like a huge thing too that you had to work through. It's another layer.
Absolutely. Well, that's what I always say to people. The first step is actually just creating awareness and having acceptance. Until you do that, like, it's just recovery is not really possible. Like, we have to get it. Yeah. Right. Courtney, what was the catalyst then that led to you finally quitting alcohol?
The final was I lost my rescue cat for the second time due to being in a blackout and going to smoke a cigarette at like 2 a.m. and leaving the screen door open. So she snuck out. And the next morning when I woke up, my boyfriend was like, Fiona's gone. You can continue doing this, but I'm going to jump off this ride because I don't want to continue to be in a relationship like this. So I sat in a terrible hangover, probably one of the worst I've had, for 3 days. And I found Fiona on that third day. And during that time before she was found, I made a pact to the universe. And I was like, if I find Fiona, I will give up drinking because I can't do this anymore. And so with that and Matt giving me that opportunity, because no one else ever put it like that to me before. And I didn't really love two other souls as much as I did at that time, and I loved them more than myself. And so I found Fiona, and I have not drank since.
Wow.
But at that point too, that's what I'm saying. Like from 25 to 29, I tried that game of trying to fit it into my life. And by the 29, I was just so good and tired. I was over it. And that's where I wanted off the ride, because in those 3 days of laying there, dry heaving on the floor, that I'm not lying about, like that dry heaving on the floor, because I was that sick and poisoned myself that bad. I didn't want to live like that anymore. It wasn't a good way to keep living, because I was going to eventually end up dying by by drinking.
How powerful do you think it was for Matt to essentially give you that ultimatum and to stop enabling your behavior?
Yeah, I mean, that definitely for him, you know, for him, I know that was hard, but I don't think it was that hard. But I also too think that Matt and I were meant to be together in that sense too, where it was like these two people find each other, right, on this big planet Earth, and no longer want this for themselves anymore. Matt never had a problem, but Matt did give up alcohol when I quit drinking, because he was one of those who could drink normally, right? Like he would have two.
Wow.
Yeah, he would have two, and then the next day just be like garbage. I mean, he definitely partied in his 20s, but then in his 30s, he just wasn't processing it as well as he used to. So he was just to the point too where he was over it. So, you know, then these two people been together for 1.5 years at that point and make this decision, and it's like, okay, and it forever changed the course of both of them, you know?
Absolutely. I think it can be really challenging for people who have a loved one who is in the throes of addiction to, you know, because on one hand you want to love somebody unconditionally and be for them and support them, but that can so easily become enabling.
Yes.
And when an addict knows that they can get away with their behavior no matter what, there's no incentive to want to change their life, really. It makes it a lot harder. And I had my own personal experience with this is I was in a marriage where there was a lot of addiction, and I got sober first, and then my husband at the time tried to get sober, but it wasn't, you know, he had a different experience where he didn't quite get it the first time. Yeah. And it wasn't until we actually made the decision to separate with love that he started down his own recovery journey, and he's nearly 2 years sober now, clean and sober, which is just incredible. But it wasn't going to happen if we stayed together.
Are you guys back together now or no?
No, we're not. We're not. And we, you know, I'm so grateful because we have a very beautiful, supportive relationship. We live in different cities, but we will always be there for each other, and we're grateful for the experiences and the time we shared together. But our recoveries had to come first. And there's wonderful stories like yours where that means that you'll stay together. And then sometimes there's not. But I think trusting that there is something greater in store for all of us, and you just have to make sure that you stay open to that and really trust. You know, I had no idea what my life, I was full of so much fear at the beginning of my sobriety, you know, and I didn't know anything, but I knew that I couldn't drink, and I knew that I had to protect my sobriety at any cost. So yeah,
and that's the thing too. Even if you stay in a relationship, it becomes a new relationship, because, you know, a lot of, and him and I have been both through processes of healing differently. It's looked the same, but at different times. So, but it is like, even when I got sober, he quit drinking alcohol. It was like a new relationship, and we had to build on what this new relationship was all about.
Yeah, because you become completely different people. It's like you said, you're a baby when you start this journey.
Well, even too, like from time to time, he even like looks back where he's like, yeah, I think in periods of my 20s, I was like a quote unquote gray area drinker. And I was like, see what I mean? Like, and I said, and you would have never been able to recognize that if you still drank. So it's just
totally.
so it's just, for anybody, I have to say, if you're in a relationship and you get sober, just don't make any like decisions right off the bat. You know what I mean? Like, because you just never know where it will go, and you have to give these relationships a little bit of time if they're worth giving some time to.
Definitely. The guidance that I was given was don't make any big decisions in the first 12 months. And I took that really seriously.
Yeah. And I 1000% agree with that. Like, just to put your head down and just focus.
Now, Courtney, you and I are both in this sober space, this sober community, which is full of some incredible people. And I find two groups of people in the sense of when we talk about labels and whether or not people identify as being an alcoholic or not. And there's people who are quite anti using the label, using the term, and then there's people who embrace it. Now, I'm somebody who identifies proudly as being an alcoholic in recovery. How do you feel about that label?
I was always fine with the alcoholic label because it actually, if you looked at it from a science point of view, it was a disease. So I've had this talk with other podcast hosts and people, a woman who got sober about a year after me. I'm like, I am so happy that we had the alcoholic. I was like, because nowadays I think the language is getting a little confusing. And then sometimes with this, I feel like, for instance, the gray area drinking. If I would have known back in 2012 gray area drinking, I might have just rolled with that and been like, used it to keep falling off the wagon and be like, I'm a gray area drinker, So I'm totally fine with identifying as an alcoholic or, I don't still identify as an alcoholic, but back then I was, I think at some point there is like, I'm no longer that. I'm a sober woman, but to each their own,
Absolutely. At the end of the day, it's what works for you. But thank you for sharing that. I agree. I think like using the term just simplifies things. And it's, when we talk about this mission that both you and I are on about removing stigma, in my opinion, when we shy away from a term like alcoholic and we say, oh, we don't want to use that because it has a bad stigma, that fuels the stigma. Whereas if we can put a face to this label and you'll see that your next door neighbor, your physician, there are people all over the globe who identify as alcoholic and they're not the person living in the gutter with the bottle of spirits.
Oh, absolutely. And too, I think that if you identify with alcoholic for some time until you don't feel like you need to identify with that, it will help you more on your sobriety journey for long-term sobriety. Because I believe sometimes with the labels, when it comes to this, okay, I can't speak with all the labels, but when it comes to that, people want to forget. They want to forget what happened, and that is just continuing to sweep things under the rug, and you can't. In my practice for a lot of years, I reflected back on Sundays for a couple minutes and remembered some pretty bad experiences. Not bringing me into a trauma, where I would like experience a trigger and trauma, but just being like, oh yeah, I remember last time I drank when I was dry heaving and puking on my carpet and couldn't even get my head I couldn't even get my ass out of the bed to go puke in the toilet. Like, let's remember that. Let's remember that's where my alcoholism led me. Let's remember, A, B, C, and D. So I think we have to remember more and not forget, because forgetting can lead you to relapsing quicker.
Yeah, absolutely. We're often quick forgetters, aren't we? And we just try kind of focus on the good times, forgetting what the reality of the situation actually is. It's that whole idea of, it's a hot summer's day and you look across and you see someone drinking that ice cold beer and you think, oh God, that would be good. But it's like, hang on a minute. Yeah, that first one might be good, but is that going to be the way that you drink? Probably not. No. It's going to start that way and then it's going to end. Yeah.
Right. And that's where so many people do when they try the moderation game. It's like, you always end up where you started.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so, so true. So you made the decision to remove alcohol from your life. This was 2012. What did that first 12 months look like for you? How did you get sober?
In the beginning, I tried a little bit of AA. I did not connect with it. The word God was too much for me. My anxiety was, very high. So like the social aspect of it, it was very intimidating. And then I just white knuckled it. I just focused every day on waking up and not drinking that day and white knuckled the whole day long. And, but I do have to say, I started very early on gratitude, where I would wake up and say, I am thankful for another day sober. There weren't any lists at this time. There weren't people influencing me to tell me about writing gratitude down. It was just a simple thank you from another day sober. And that was about the first year. I mean, then obviously more in the first year of, getting to know myself, understanding what my triggers were, all of that. But help-wise, I just kept on trucking.
That first 3 months can often be described as the most challenging. Where the cravings can be quite strong and we're forming new habits. Everything is new. Once again, like that term you used, that newborn baby in an adult body. As a sober coach, what are some of the tips that you give people to survive those first 3 months?
Yeah, well, a lot of those first 3 months is really about protecting your energy. That is a huge one that I say to a lot of clients. And when I mean protecting your energy, it is you cannot. And I don't a lot of people are people pleasers, but you're never gonna understand the full effect of your people pleasing until you get some sobriety under your belt and see the clarity of it, So it is just all about protecting your energy, saying no to some things right now to help you just get to Friday sober. Because what happens is you go, take on. And then by Friday, you are depleted. It is more easier for you to go drink alcohol. Also, too, a lot of people who end up getting sober, or a lot of people who have drinking problems, are empaths or highly sensitive people. So can
we talk more about that?
Yeah, absolutely.
Can you describe those two for me?
So I describe empaths and highly sensitive people as kind of the same, right? Like it's kind of the same, but looks a little bit different. But empaths are when you feel other people's energy. You are burnt out by the overwhelm. That could even be watching news cycles, right? Taking on 30 minutes of negative doom and gloom, and then you receive that and internalize it. And then you carry on that emotion. You carry on other people's emotions. You feel too with the empath of just like you can feel people's sadness or anger or any of that. Even too, if just an energy walks into a room, you're able to experience that. And highly sensitive too are kind of the same thing, but just are sensitive people by what other people can say or do, how they get responded to, So, and a lot of people drink to kind of bury that feeling because they were never described what it was before, other than they were told they were too sensitive for many years. Where it was more like shamed upon, like, oh, you're just too sensitive. And I have to say, that is one feeling I always remember of being like, I always felt sensitive. I don't know what anxiety felt like at 7, but I knew of being a sensitive person at a very young age.
I'm thinking, how do I relate to this? I don't know if I was so much sensitive, but I was definitely hyper aware of wanting everyone to love me and wanting everyone to approve of me. And so I would almost shape shift depending on the environment that I was in to make sure that I was keeping everyone around me happy.
Yeah, and that's also a trauma response. And that goes into people pleasing, you know what I mean? But it's just like, energetically of taking on emotions and feelings and sitting there and allowing people to trauma dump on you or tell you all about themselves, and then you have to sit with it. So it is very interesting. For anyone wanting to know about that, I highly recommend to figure that out for yourself if you are a person who identifies as an empath or a highly sensitive person.
Yeah. And where do you think boundaries play into all of this?
Oh my God. Well, boundaries too is another way of going back to, like, if you were never shown boundaries, how are you supposed to make boundaries when you don't know what that was? And that's also too in the conditioning of your home, And for a lot of us who have the problem with drinking, you continue to break boundaries within yourself day after day, month after month, year after year. So when you get sober, it's like nobody takes me serious, but then it's like, well, you have to start taking yourself serious and leading by example by setting the boundary within yourself that you're not going to drink today.
Yeah. Oh, that's so true, isn't it? And every single day, that you build another day on top of the day prior, you also rebuild your self-esteem.
Yes, 1000%. And then within that self-esteem, then it's like, okay, I'm going to start trusting myself that I can do this. And then boundaries come into play, like, a little bit down the road of, all right, I'm going to start making boundaries to my parents or siblings or a loved one, whoever.
So true. Courtney, what inspired you to start a National Sober Day, and what does it represent?
So I actually was watching a reality television show, and this girl started a national holiday for Outfit of the Day. So in the States, okay? And I was like, oh my God, is there one for sobriety? I was like, I know there's a National Recovery Month. I was like, but I don't think there's a National Sober Day. And I'm thinking of this at like 10 o'clock at night, And so the next day I went to the website, and the lady was like, I applied, filled out the paperwork. And she came back at me. She's like, there's not a holiday. And I was like, you're kidding me. And she's like, I'm as much as shocked as you are, like going back and forth with emails. So the day really represents a celebration of sobriety. Every day that you're sober is obviously a celebration, but having this is just more of an awareness for sobriety and addiction, because you have to talk about both of these. You can't, sobriety and recovery, you have to talk about addiction to talk about that, and vice versa. They're just topics that go hand in hand with one another. So I just wanted to add more of a national awareness to the terrible disease of addiction, and just know for people that this is a celebration, that sobriety is not the death sentence. So yeah,
that's beautiful.
And then also too, it gives, if there's a loved one who's got a family member, in sobriety, like, don't drink that day. Don't drink that day. Stand with them and not drink that day, and celebrate and go do something sober with them.
That's beautiful. It's like an act of solidarity as well.
Yeah, and so tell me, people need that.
Absolutely. What date is National Sober Day?
Oh, it is September 14th. So September is National Recovery Month. September 14th I picked because both of my grandmas, who had a huge impact on me, they both died on that day, years apart. So I picked that day. Yeah, so I picked that day to honor those two ladies.
That's beautiful. Well, I'm excited. I will be celebrating with you on the other side of the world for this year. Fantastic. On National Sober Day.
I love it.
Courtney, you talk about staying in your lane in sobriety. What do you mean by this?
So when I got sober, I mean, a lot of people were like, you got to go to AA. I got told that all the time. Like, yeah, and it's like, okay, well, I tried that, but I didn't bond with it at first. I didn't vibe with it, right? And I did go back to AA years down the road. But really staying in your lane and that's the thing. I just kept my blinders on and did for me what I felt was good at the time, right? And even too, I went back to bartending for a little bit in my sobriety. People told me, don't you go back, you're going to relapse. And so then I had other people's fears in me when I went for my first shift. I was like, I killed that. I can do this. This is actually more empowering than I thought, right? And I just think that people have to understand when it comes to sobriety and recovery, it is tailored to you. And that's in my book, I write that. Like, that's why how my book is laid out the way that it is. It's because it's tailored to them. What worked for your neighbor and your best friend and your dad's best friend is not going to work for you, because we are not all the same people, So you just have to put the blinders on and kind of just put it in and stay in your lane. Like, do what works best for you without using drugs and alcohol that day, or alcohol, whatever your drug choice is.
Yeah, because when you simplify it down to that's it. You just don't pick up a drink or a drug.
Right. And like, however you got there at the end of the day is how you got there. It does. You're not, because even too, I've had so many people throughout the years say like, am I doing this right? Like, I feel like I'm doing sobriety wrong. And maybe too, within the first couple of years, I felt the same way, but it was like, no, because what is the point of this? Does it mean I need to, in one day, listen to 1,000 podcasts about sobriety, or go to 90 meetings in 90 days, or read 25 quit lit books? Am I doing sobriety right then? And the answer is no. You know what I mean? Because you have to plan it. Everybody, people have kids, people don't have kids. People have jobs, people don't have jobs. People have terrible financial situations. Some people are millionaires. Like, everybody's stress looks different. Some people thrived in a global pandemic. Some people did not.
Yeah, it's so true, isn't it? I've come through 12-step, and I still attend regular meetings at 3.5 years sober. And one of the biggest things that I've gotten from that is community. But again, I have other friends that have tried it, and it hasn't been for them. I think the biggest thing is just to not give up and to keep trying, remembering your why. Like, why are you doing this?
Yeah.
Whatever works. Courtney, this is a big question, but I want to know the first thing that comes to your mind when I ask you, what's the biggest thing that you've discovered about yourself in sobriety?
Oh, the biggest thing is that I am strong. That I'm if I put my mind to something, that I can do it. And for a lot of years, I let other people not make me feel that way, where I put a lot of my validation into other people's feelings. And so in sobriety, I have empowered myself to be like, F yes, I am strong and I can do hard things, So that's really something that I have learned about myself. And I have also learned about myself too, on the other side of that I am an introvert extrovert. For years, I thought I was an extrovert because I liked being social. But now that I understand myself more, like, I'm like, oh, no, I like to decompress and not talk to anybody for like an hour or two. And like, I rejuvenate that way. That's why I was telling you earlier, for fun, what do I do now? Like, sit in silence.
I know. I used to think the same thing. I was like, I must be extroverted because I'm a party person and I can be loud and I can be bubbly. And there is still that part of my personality, but my gosh, do I love being alone. I don't think I ever spent never more than 24 hours by myself prior to getting sober. And, in 2021, I moved cities back to Melbourne, which was the most locked down city on the globe. And I moved into an apartment by myself, and I was alone sometimes for up to a week at a time. And it was the most powerful, soul-searching experience that I know I'll probably never get the opportunity to do again. And in many ways, I'm so grateful for that, because I learned so much about myself in that time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Courtney, what advice would you have for somebody who's listening along today who's really struggling with their relationship with alcohol?
My advice is always this, is to not give up on yourself. There's no magic pill. There's no magic answer, other than just simply, you have to start today with not drinking. and that the struggle that you will feel, because there are days that you struggle. This is not all sunshines and rainbows and unicorns and scrunchies, that you are worth the fight to keep going. Like I did in the very beginning. I had to become the number one cheerleader for myself, and simply just waking up and saying, thank you for another day. Even if you don't believe in a higher power or somebody else, just saying it to your wall. Believe in yourself and that you can, again, do hard things, but just keep going and do not give up on yourself, because it's going to take, it took me 4 years. I'm not too sure how long it took you, but it takes somebody, it takes a person, which I heard a statistic recently that it can take on the average up to 7 years for somebody to finally give up alcohol, to quit drinking.
Wow.
For good. Mm-hmm.
Wow.
But it makes sense. If you think about it, if you think of like your past where you're like, yeah, absolutely. And just like, you're never going to find the answers in the bottom of a bottle. And it's just going to keep adding to your struggle.
I can add to that. I laugh at this story now. At the time, I certainly wasn't laughing, but it was 2013 when I was given my first big book, and it was actually from my family, and they'd wrapped it as a Christmas present and put it under the tree. Suffice to say, I was not very pleased when I opened it up, but it was 2012. My memory serves me correct. It was 2012. Now, I didn't get sober until, 2012. Now, I didn't get sober until 2020. So it just goes to show that everybody's journey to getting here looks different. But like you said, I absolutely love that message. Just don't give up on yourself.
Yeah. But like, please don't. I mean, I mean it with all honesty. I say this on a lot of podcasts I do. I say it on my own, just like you can't give up on yourself, because when you do, that means it's over.
That's so true. Courtney, I've got one final question that I'd love to close on here today. What are your 3 non-negotiables that allow you to live your life today happy, joyous, and free?
Yeah. My 3 non-negotiables, number 1 is my morning routine that I'm now back onto, because that morning routine helps me continue on my sober journey. And I actually should have put that in number 2. Number 1 is not drinking alcohol today. Totally. Number 2 is my morning routine with all of that. And my number 3 is to continue to laugh in this life, to make myself laugh or laugh at something every day. And that is another tool I have used from day one in my sobriety tool belt, is to laugh and allow yourself to laugh. So that is my non-negotiable.
They're beautiful. I love those. Morning routine, not drinking today, and remembering to laugh, because sobriety does not need to be boring. It can be fun. In fact, it is fun.
Yeah, absolutely. And it doesn't have to be that serious all the time. Like I said to you earlier, and in the show, like that picture you're going to use, I look like I'm about to eat a small child in a blackout. Like, so you can laugh at yourself. You can sit there and be like, you don't have to be all quiet in a corner and just like, oh God, like laugh. It will help you.
That's beautiful. Hey, Courtney, if people want to find out more about you, reach out to you, your book, your podcast, everything, where should they go?
Yep. So my podcast is Sober Vibes, and that's on all the podcast apps. And then also you can reach out to me on Instagram at Sober Vibes, or you can go to my website, CourtneyRecovered.com. My book is on Amazon, Barnes & Noble. All that information too is on my website. Or just reach out to me in direct message on Instagram, and I will gladly share anything you want.
Fabulous. I'll make sure I pop all of that information in the episode show notes as well. Courtney, we say here on Behind the Smile that when we recover loudly, no one need suffer in silence. So thank you so, so much for coming onto the show and sharing your story with us today.
Thank you for having me.
A big thank you for tuning in today. If you'd like to support the show, you can do so by clicking the subscribe button and leaving a review. Every review helps this podcast become more discoverable, meaning more people can hear these stories of strength and hope. Together, we will continue to remove the stigma around mental health, trauma, and addiction. Remember to reach out to those you care about, and I'll see you next time.